Thanks, everybody, for joining. First off, thanks to the 4As for having us and for Colle McVoy for hosting. It's not lost on us that it's been a jam-packed morning full of content, and we're going to keep this to a tight 20 minutes to get you all to lunch. Appreciate you joining and sitting here as we discuss the omni-channel opportunity. So we're going to start with 3 rapid-fire questions here for our panelists, get a little peek behind the curtain and to what makes them tick and what interests them. So we'll just go down the line here with Alex first. What is one buzzword or trend that you believe is overrated in media today?
Microphones that work. What's one buzzword? Efficiency. I think we're still in a race to the bottom from an industry standpoint without any consideration to attention or impact.
What's your guilty pleasure when it comes to content?
Health and wellness podcasts. I'm a Rich Roll disciple.
And biggest media trend that you think brands can't avoid?
Can't avoid. Video. So video is everywhere, and it's only going to continue to increase, so video.
Matt, overrated buzzword or trend in the industry
right now?
You're
going to love this one. So I'm going to preface this. Huge AI guy, big fan, got to embrace it. I agree with a lot of sentiments. This is the time of AI, and if you don't embrace it, you will be left far behind. But it's every vendor kind of cramming AI. I'm on the media side. Literally everyone I talk to, AI this, AI that, AI powered this, right? Whether it is influenced by AI or not. So that is starting to drive me crazy.
That's fair. What about your guilty pleasure when it comes to content? Something AI-based?
Yeah, AI. No, this is kind of nerdy, but I'm a musician. I love to geek out on music theory and technical application of guitars. A lot of YouTube. So that's been fun.
Awesome. And biggest trend that brands can't afford to ignore?
Retail media. Retail media is exploding. A lot of you guys probably know that. It's important to think about how we fund that within different parts of our organization. It's complex. Who owns it? Is it the brand? Is it the trade? Right? But I see crazy stats. $1 out of $4 what we spend through retail media in by 2026 or something. So something that you definitely can't ignore.
Awesome. And Heather, overrated buzzword or trend in media today?
The funnel as a linear journey. That baby ain't linear anymore.
And linear in there is also kind of one of those potential words. Guilty pleasure when it comes to content?
I subscribe and I pay for print, specifically magazines and really good journalism. You have to support good journalism.
I love that. Mine is quite the opposite. I love the applause, yes, warranted. Mine's a little opposite. We'll get to that in a second. But biggest media trend that brands can't afford to ignore?
I have 2. One is Reddit. I love Reddit. And women's sports. Very underinvested in right now. White space, good opportunity.
I love that. I was going to start with guilty pleasure because it was opposite, but my biggest trend is live sports in general, encompassing men's and women's. Very timely with March Madness resuming tomorrow. And I'll touch on it a little bit throughout our discussion today, but I think that's a huge opportunity that brands can't afford to miss right now. Guilty pleasure, I would imagine, is probably similar to many that are sitting out here. It's just kind of binge watching content, specifically the Chicago series, Medfire PD. If anybody has not seen it, it's on NBC, Peacock. I'll stop plugging it, but it's been around for about a decade.
I was dipping into the archives.
Yeah, it's still new.
Linear
it's still fresh.
Still exists.
It does still exist, and it's still going strong. Same producers, Law and Order, Dick Wolf. So I will move on.
Super fan.
A little bit.
Let's not get off this for a second. Yeah, let's keep going.
We got 15 minutes. I can take the rest of the time.
Unpack it.
And then overrated buzzword at risk of kind of getting booted off the stage here. And ironically enough, I think it's omnichannel. I don't not believe in omnichannel. I just think that we're an industry full of acronyms and buzzwords, and why do we need another one? I think there's more authentic and simpler ways to define what omnichannel is. And so that kind of leads me to my first question for you, Alex, is we hear omnichannel all the time. Everybody has a different definition of what that truly means. When you hear omnichannel, how do you define it? What do you think of? And if you have an example of an opportunity and a client that has showcased how omnichannel or a unified approach leads to business outcomes, what can you share?
Yeah, sure. I think you had a great overrated theme. So let's start with omnichannel. So how I think about omnichannel, the word omni means all. So omnichannel is certainly the cool, sexy theme that we're all talking about, but really it means all channels. So when we consider that from a media standpoint, it's a diversified media mix. Partners like the Trade Desk, like Meta, like Google are helping brands and advertisers establish a more diversified media approach. And so we see a lot of head nods, like that's an easy one to go after. But I think what's really more important from an omnichannel standpoint is all sales channels. And so being where your customer is from a media standpoint, that's easy. Build creative, launch it in the marketplace, but really like focusing on the sales channel and incorporating whether it's healthcare with call center data or a retailer with offline data. That's the more difficult component of that. And so we have clients, many of you are probably super focused on one sales channel, and that's online. And so it's no surprise that search and social gets a bulk of the media mix. And so as you start to incorporate offline sales data or other sales channels, at Ovative, we use our Emerge technology that brings that data in. It starts to tell a different story from a media mix and a media performance standpoint. And so the partners like Meta, like Google, like the Trade Desk are starting to incorporate more measurement solutions within the space. And so for those that are spending a bulk of their budget in search and social, when you start to incorporate offline data, again, it starts to tell a different story. And so, the connected TVs, the audio, the partnerships, like those are going to get a more bulk of the media mix as soon as you start to incorporate offline data. And so as I think about Omni, I think about all, both from a media channel standpoint as well as a sales channel standpoint.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's, to go back to your buzzword, I think the funnel aspect, the ability to look at all channels and how they play together. You kind of traditionally hear a CTV or an audio being the upper funnel, right? And that there's really no ability to tie that to a sale. That's not the case anymore, as I know we all know in this room, but there's just more connectivity that exists on and offline, which is, I kind of agree with your definition there of Omni.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. With all the digital attribution that we've had over the years, the opportunity has been like, well, let's maximize those channels because we can see it, we can feel it, it's in the know. But now with technologies like yours and other technologies that we leverage, pulling off that offline and that closed loop measurement into it really changes your perspective on what success really is. If we stop just looking at things like last click and things like that, right? The other thing I think that's really important with successful omni-channel campaigns is thinking about your creative strategy. Time and time again, I always see the most effect when we are really connecting and having cohesion between all those different touch points, right? So, through your video, through your social outputs, through your digital experience, and then all the way into store, making sure that you're connecting with a cohesive message. You'd be surprised how often I get, creative that feels disjointed or not connected and not thinking about the big idea all the way through, where brand is disconnected from performance and product, right? So if you can really steward that through, you're gonna see much better results.
To add to that, omnichannel requires a consumer-centric approach, like putting the consumer in the middle. Oftentimes also requiring to break down the barriers of how budgets are typically allocated on the client side and thinking more holistically in one picture is really important.
Yeah, I think you didn't specifically mention this word, which could also be a buzzword, but I think starting with the consumer and being consumer-centric, in order for that to work, there needs to be transparency across if it's brand, if it's lower funnel, if it's shopper, if it's different channels. But having that level of transparency can mean a number of different things, which also kind of brings me to the next question for you, Heather, is brands are now more than ever demanding transparency. I'm sure we all hear it in this room in some capacity. There's a number of different publications that have written pieces about it. It's just becoming front and center for a number of reasons. So with brands demanding more of that now than ever before, how are you leading those conversations as a leader for your agency? How are you helping brands come along with you, trust you, and really feel comfortable with their media strategy and execution?
Yeah, transparency is a pillar of trust, right? And we're talking about building trust with our clients. One thing I've heard consistently with new clients over the last 2 years is a pain point that they have experienced with their previous agency was around the lack of transparency as it relates to platform fees fee structure in general, but then also just regular reporting out of their data and metrics. That has also been a reason for them to put business in review, and I think it's something that is very easy to manage and to tackle by having that transparency, whether you have additional fees associated with the platform or you're all in, and you don't, just communicating that up front is really imperative. And I read a stat, it was about a year ago, it might have been a Deloitte stat, but it was about saying agencies who are transparent as it relates to fees, but also reporting and metrics and data are 1.5 times more profitable than agencies who are not transparent. And I would have to think that that has to do with establishing that trust up front in the relationship.
I'm gonna let you guys speak because I feel like you both have some great insight to add here. So I'll pause and let you go, Matt.
Yeah, no, I was just trust is paramount, right?
Yeah.
We all know in this room that this is a relationship business. It's driven by that. It's the lifeblood of what we do is, ensuring that we have that relationship with the client and we establish that trust. I think the number one thing to, aside from fees and all of that, right? It's critical that, we're open book on what's going on with our media expenditure, but finding different moments with your clients to talk transparently beyond just like, technology and media, right?
Yep.
Be transparent about like, what are your problems? What are your, issues? And find those moments outside of just like the day-to-day work. We spend so much time, here's your media plan, here's your creative brief, like just all these functional things. To really sit down and break down, like, let's put the work aside for a minute and talk through, transparently, like, what do you see in our agency that's maybe not working? What is not working in your business? And work to solve those challenges together, I think helps strengthen that trust and lengthen the, relationships that you have.
Tough act to follow. Yeah, I think Heather mentioned it, access to their data. So it's the client's data. And I think far too often we're afraid that clients are going to ask us questions. They're going to go too deep on the optimizations that we're making. But ultimately, that builds trust, that's transparency. And so whether it's your DSP seat or your Meta account, the client deserves access to that data. It's their data. And so I think building the trust, building that transparency, educating your client on why and what you're doing only helps solidify the performance that you're driving and ultimately, again, like builds that trust over time.
Can I add one more?
Go for it.
My brain was ticking while we're up here. Collaboration. So bringing clients and agencies together, mutually beneficial relationships from the very beginning and building things together. I think when clients can see how the decisions are being made, how the resources are being allocated, they have a lot more trust in the process, which also leads to more long-term relationships.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep with the buzzword theme. I think programmatic in general has been something that I think we as a collective industry kind of shot ourselves in the foot from the jump because it's not very descriptive. And we've kind of been fighting the battle of, a decade ago, it was no questions asked. We put money into a platform. We don't know what actually happens, and the results that we get on the back end are phenomenal. Clients are happy. There's no questions asked. And we've come a long way in 10 years, and marketers now are more savvy than they've ever been. They're asking all of the right questions. They're not asking you about transparency and fees and dollars because they're trying to be facetious or think that you're hiding things. They just want to know where it's going and what's working and why it's working and to be able to optimize and to drive their business forward. And so I think it's just something that we always think about and encourage. If something's quote unquote expensive, that doesn't make it bad. Think about the products that you use on a daily basis. The quality of those products is going to be far greater than something that is cheaper. And so don't shy away from that. The value that you add to your partnerships is there. Just be confident in how you explain that. And it comes from trust and the years of building that you all three of you talked about. And I think the question for you then, Matt, kind of on that note is channels like CTV and audio and quote unquote premium content, March Madness, they carry high price tags. And that's often the first thing that either shies brands away entirely because they don't want to pay that, or they start to ask questions about why it was so expensive. How do you approach that conversation and really help brands come along and feel confident that, yes, you might pay a premium, but the value is there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think to start with, it all comes back, and you mentioned it earlier, start with your audience, right? Are the eyeballs going to CTV? Are they spending their time consuming streaming audio? Are they listening to a podcast? If they are, it's important and critical that we get in front of that, and we're in those areas as well, right? So that's the first thing. The second, the objective that you're going after, right? So whether you're trying to build the brand versus drive sales, it might be different channels that you select. So if you're really trying to impact brand impact metrics, years and years, sight, sound, motion of TV, now CTV, is a tremendous place to do that. So making sure that you're matching whatever vehicles that you have to the objective is critical. Something that was mentioned in our first session by Edelman today is impact over reach, right? And I think that's a critical component for what he was talking about, but also applies here as well. We can certainly get a ton of tonnage with banner ads, with native, really inexpensive taboola ads, whatever it might be. We can drive efficiency. In programmatic, we've been saying for years and years, like, I can make the CPM whatever you want. If you want it to be $1, I can give it to you at $1, right? But is that really impactful? Is it viewable? Are people actually watching it? So I think really selling impact and showcasing how that is, more important sometimes than reach, or really than efficiency. You called out efficiency, is a big component of it. The last thing, and likely the most critical thing to not only like getting into the game with CTV or audio, is measurement, improving the value, right? We need to create constructs and be intentional about the objectives we're trying to drive. And if we're trying to drive brand lift, deploy a brand lift study. If we're looking to drive sales in the long term, bring in those closed loop measurement opportunities and look at, incrementality of, the efforts of putting something like a CTV into market. And then of course, like taking a step back and using tools like MMM to validate investments across all these different things. So sometimes starting is the hardest part because we don't have that measurement built and those results to prove it. But I think through the strategic approach to how we're leveraging it, that's how you can get going.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Alex.
No, go.
I was going to say, I think, going back to my March Madness theme, unfortunately, I was on the opposite side of the Illinois-Kentucky game, but that was the most watched game in NCAA history. It was up to an average of 10.1 million viewers, which is 13% up from last year. The average consumer attention span has dropped 4 seconds. It's only 8 seconds now in the last 3 years. So you mentioned creative earlier. Like, the creative aspect is absolutely a part. You have to have the right creative to grab attention, but you've got such a finite period of time to do that. And people are engaged in sports. People are there. They want to watch. They want to see what's going to happen. And so that's an opportunity that, there's a ton of data that shows the business result on the back end, even though you're paying a sometimes 2-3x premium on the front end, is absolutely well worth it.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, I think we're just scratching the surface on attention-based metrics. So I think someone spoke to that earlier today, but focusing on what the environment is, focusing on what the device is, how long were they spending with the brand. I think a lot of the maybe like live sports example, they're no longer cutting away to full 30 or 60-second ad pods. They're keeping the live content. They're just kind of like shifting it over and making a unique experience that both has, on golf or racing or anything else that's still the sports content, but having the ad pod right next to that. And so you're still like gaining the attention of the customer while not completely cutting away and letting them go to the bathroom or the kitchen or wherever else.
Simply said by Matt earlier, efficiency is driven by impact. Focus on impact and efficiency will follow. That's it.
Yeah, and doubling down on what you're talking about, these like new emerging formats, and we talked about that creative cohesion, right? That doesn't mean that everything has to be same, right? Like in units like that, I think it's important to have like actually bespoke creations that follow a thematic kind of like creative idea all the way through the path to purchase. So it's really exciting now in our space. We have all these different canvases that we can paint on and all of that. So it's really important. And what we love to do, because we're a media-only shop, is partner really close with like a lot of the creative agencies and a lot of our creative partners to develop, they're obviously owning like the big narrative of the creative approach, but pulling together like, hey, here's a specific opportunity that we can really be creative and stand out in something like these breakaway units. So I think that's a huge opportunity for everyone in the room as well.
Yeah, and I like the blank canvas kind of metaphor. It's the media industry is fragmented and it only continues to become more so. So we'll leave you with one key takeaway from all of you, and then we'll let you all get to lunch. But we'll start with Alex. What's one piece of advice that you give brands today to navigate what's ahead?
I'd say get back to contextual targeting. I think we as, again, an industry have shifted to a reliance on third-party data. Quality of that data is still in question, so focus on contextual environments.
Yeah, and I talked about it a lot already. It's that creative cohesion. We ran a lot of campaigns without a connected creative idea from start to finish, and a lot of campaigns with that. And it never fails that a well-orchestrated creative strategy that moves across an omnichannel media plan generally always outperforms kind of isolated or spotty, fragmented creative.
I would say brands have a plethora of data, both performance data and data about their audience, and to take that data and use it to make calculated risks, especially as we're in times of uncertainty or things are ebbing and flowing, that's really an opportunity for brands, good brands, to become great.
Awesome. And I'll just add, I think, lean into partnerships. The people that you work with internally at your own organization, your external partners. For those of you with kids, it takes a village to raise kids. It takes a village to figure out what the hell's going on in our market. So lean on those that have expertise in certain areas to help you better educate yourself and help to educate the brands who are worried about growing their business at the end of the day. So with that, thank you again, everybody, for joining, sticking in. I will let the 4As chime in on lunch details, but it's been a pleasure.